My family began dividing my property before I was dead. They did not say it that way. They used softer words. Planning. Preparing. Keeping things fair. My son wanted the house. My daughter wanted my savings. My daughter-in-law had already chosen which furniture she planned to keep. Even my grandson had been promised my husband's truck. They believed everything was settled because they had seen an old copy of my will. What they did not know was that I had changed it 3 months earlier. I did not change it because I stopped loving them. I changed it because I finally understood what they loved most about me. And when they gathered around my dining table, expecting to discuss their inheritance, my attorney opened a different folder. That was the day my family learned that a future inheritance is not a family-owned account. It is a gift. And gifts can be changed when gratitude becomes entitlement. My name is Dorothy Whitaker. I was 75 years old when my children discovered that the will they had been counting on no longer existed. I lived in a quiet town outside Raleigh, North Carolina, in the same house my husband, Samuel, and I bought 41 years earlier. It was a white 2-story house with dark shutters, a deep front porch, and a narrow garden along the eastern side. Samuel built the porch swing himself. It leaned slightly to the left because he refused to follow the instructions exactly. Every spring, I considered replacing it. Every spring, I decided the lean was part of the house. Samuel and I raised 2 children there. Our son, Mark, was 3 years older than our daughter, Julia. Mark was confident from the day he learned to speak. He wanted to be first, wanted to choose, wanted to know what everyone else was receiving. Julia was quieter. She noticed feelings before facts. As children, they were close. As adults, they became competitors. Samuel often blamed himself. He believed we had spent too much time trying to make everything equal. Equal birthday budgets. Equal help with college. Equal wedding contributions. Equal support with home deposits. We wanted fairness. Instead, we accidentally taught them to keep score. If Mark received help replacing a roof, Julia wanted to know the amount. If Julia needed assistance during her divorce, Mark wanted reassurance that it would be reflected later. Later meant the will. For years, I pretended not to notice. Parents become skilled at pretending family tension is temporary. Samuel died 4 years before the will changed. He had been diagnosed with heart disease in his early 60s, but he lived a full life for another decade. His death was sudden. He went asleep beside me and did not wake up. Afterward, Mark and Julia helped with the funeral, the paperwork, and the empty house. For a while, grief brought us together. Then the estate questions began. Samuel and I had owned everything jointly. The house passed to me. Our accounts were either joint or named me as beneficiary. There was no dramatic will reading. No family gathered in an office while an attorney announced surprises. Real estates are usually quieter. Documents are filed. Accounts are transferred. Bills are paid. Life continues around the paperwork. Our attorney, William Grant, explained that Samuel's will mattered only for property that did not pass another way. Mark seemed disappointed. "So everything is Mom's now?" he asked. William answered calmly. "Yes. What happens later, that depends on your mother's estate plan." Mark looked at me. "You and Dad already made wills." "We did." "Are they the same?" "Mostly." He wanted more information. I told him the basic arrangement. The house and remaining estate would be divided equally between Mark and Julia. Mark would serve as executor. If either child died before me, that child's share would pass to their children. At the time, it seemed simple. It also seemed fair. Mark relaxed. Julia asked no further questions. For the next 2 years, the will remained unchanged. Then the language around my possessions began to shift. Mark stopped saying your house. He started saying the house. Julia referred to my savings as the estate. My daughter-in-law, Karen, once stood in my dining room and said, "This table will look beautiful in our new place." I laughed because I assumed she was joking. She ran her hand across the wood. Mark said it was promised to him. I looked at Mark. I never promised you this table, he smiled. Dad always said I could have it. Samuel may have said that. He often told the children they could have certain things someday. The truck, the tools, the grandfather clock. But someday had become a list they treated like a signed contract. I told Mark we would discuss personal belongings later. He looked offended. What is there to discuss? It is still my table, I know that. His answer was technically correct. His tone was not. Julia behaved differently, but wanted the same certainty. She asked whether my bank accounts had transfer-on-death beneficiaries. She said she was helping a friend settle an estate and wanted to make sure everything was organized. I answered generally. She continued. Mark is still executor, right? Yes. Why him? Because he lived closer when we made the will. He still lives closer. Then why are you asking? She said she was only curious. 2 weeks later, Mark asked the same question in reverse. Julia hasn't convinced you to change the executor, has she? No. She's been asking about the accounts, so have you. I'm trying to protect you. They were both always trying to protect me. Neither seemed interested in protecting me from them. The first event that truly disturbed me happened at Christmas. The entire family was at my house. Mark and Corinne brought their son, Caleb. Julia brought her daughter, Emily. Both grandchildren were in their early 20s. After dinner, I went upstairs to find an extra blanket. When I returned, everyone had gathered in Samuel's old office. Mark was opening drawers. Corinne was photographing shelves. Julia held a yellow notepad. What are you doing? I asked. They all turned. Mark laughed. We're finally making the list. What list? Dad's things, so nobody argues later. Julia held up the notepad. We thought it would be easier if you told us who gets what. I looked around the room. Samuel's fishing rods. His watch collection. Books. The model train he built with Caleb. The small cedar box containing letters he wrote me during military service. Everything still belonged to me. Yet my family stood there as though they were conducting an inventory after my funeral. I am not doing this today, I said. Mark closed the drawer. We're all here, it makes sense. It is Christmas, that's why it makes sense. Corinne pointed toward an old desk lamp. I don't want this to become uncomfortable later. It is uncomfortable now. The room became quiet. Julia lowered the notepad. Mom, we're not trying to upset you. You are walking through my husband's office deciding who gets his possessions. They're family possessions, Mark said. No, they are my possessions. His expression tightened. Dad wanted us to have things, eventually. There is no reason to pretend this stuff will stay here forever. The words hurt more than he realized. Or perhaps he realized and believed practicality mattered more. I looked at each of them. Leave the room. Mark laughed once. Mom. Leave Samuel's office. They left. But the mood changed for the rest of the evening. Mark told Corinne I was becoming overly emotional. Julia tried to smooth things over. Caleb and Emily avoided eye contact. After everyone left, I sat in Samuel's chair. The drawers were still open. One of his watches had been moved. The cedar box was no longer aligned with the edge of the shelf. Small things, but they made the room feel disturbed. That night, I called William. I told him I wanted to review my estate plan. He asked whether something had happened. Yes, I said. My family started acting like the will had already happened. We met the following week. William did not tell me what to do. He asked questions. Did I still want the estate divided equally? Did I still trust Mark as executor? Were there charities or other people I wanted to include? Did I have concerns about creditor issues, divorce, addiction, or financial mismanagement? Did I want personal items distributed through a separate written list? The question about Mark as executor mattered most. An executor handles information, property, debts, and distribution. It requires patience, neutrality, and respect for instructions. Mark was organized, but he was not neutral. He already viewed himself as the future owner of the house. Julia would challenge him. Their competition could turn my estate into a final argument. I told William I no longer wanted either child serving as executor. He recommended a professional fiduciary. The service would charge a fee. That did not bother me. Peace was worth a fee. Then we discussed the house. Under the old will, Mark and Julia would inherit it equally. Mark had repeatedly said he wanted to keep it. Julia wanted it sold so she could receive cash. I could already imagine the fight. Mark claiming sentimental value. Julia claiming fairness. Repairs delayed. Taxes unpaid. Lawyers involved. The house becoming a weapon between them. I did not want that. I decided the house would be sold after my death. Neither child would have the right to occupy it indefinitely or purchase it below market value. The net proceeds would be divided, but not equally in the way they expected. I had spent the previous years watching behavior. Mark had received more financial help from Samuel and me during adulthood. Business loans. Home repairs. A vehicle. Several amounts had never been repaid. Julia had received help during her divorce and with medical bills, but less overall. Samuel kept records. I found them in a binder. The difference was significant. The old will ignored it. The new one would not punish Mark, but it would account for documented unpaid loans before dividing the residue. Mark's outstanding advances would be treated as part of his inheritance. Julia's smaller unpaid amount would be treated the same way. That was not revenge. It was arithmetic. I also made direct gifts to Caleb and Emily. Not through their parents. Each grandchild would receive funds in trust for education, housing, or long-term investment. I left the cedar box of letters to Emily because she had spent hours asking me about family history. I left Samuel's model train to Caleb because he built part of it with his grandfather. The truck would be sold. Mark had called it his for years, but he had already received Samuel's work van after retirement. The proceeds from the truck would support a scholarship at the community college where Samuel once taught evening classes. I also left a portion of the estate to the hospice organization that cared for him during his final months. When William asked whether I wanted to disinherit anyone, I said no. I did not want to erase my children. I wanted to remove their sense of ownership. He prepared the documents. I signed them in his office with proper witnesses. The old will was revoked. The new original was stored securely. William retained a copy. The professional fiduciary accepted the nomination. I told no one. For 3 months, my family continued believing the old plan remained in place. That period taught me more than I wanted to know. Mark began discussing renovations to my house. Not renovations for me. Renovations for when he moved in. The upstairs bathroom will need to be opened up, he said one afternoon. Why? It's too small. For whom? He smiled. Long term. I stared at him. You have a home, we may not keep it forever. That has nothing to do with mine. He laughed as if I were missing the obvious. Eventually, Karen and I will have decisions to make. No, eventually my executor will have decisions to make. His smile faded. You said I was executor. I said that years ago, so it changed. I did not say that. His eyes narrowed. He changed the subject, but I knew suspicion had begun. Julia approached from another direction. She called and said she wanted to help simplify my finances. She suggested consolidating accounts. She wanted a list of balances, beneficiaries, and passwords. I keep records, I said. Where? Securely. What if something happens? My attorney and designated agents know what to do. Which agents? People I trust. The silence that followed was heavy. Do you not trust me? That is not what I said. It sounds like it. Trust does not require giving you my passwords. She became emotional. She said I was shutting her out. I reminded her that my finances were private. She said privacy became secrecy when family needed to prepare. Prepare. That word again. My children were preparing for a life event I was still trying to postpone. A month later, I had a minor health scare. I felt chest pressure while gardening. My neighbor drove me to the emergency room. The tests showed no heart attack. The doctor believed it was severe indigestion combined with anxiety. I returned home that evening. Mark and Julia arrived within an hour. At first, they were concerned. Then they began asking questions. Had I updated my medical directive? Where was the will? Was the house still going equally to them? Who could access the bank accounts? I sat on the sofa with the hospital bracelet still around my wrist. My children stood in front of me discussing estate logistics. You both need to stop, I said. Mark frowned. We're trying to make sure everything is in order. I am alive. No one said you were. You are asking where my will is before asking whether I need dinner. Julia looked ashamed. Mark looked irritated. That's unfair. We came immediately, and immediately began discussing property. He told me I was twisting their concern. I removed the hospital bracelet. Then I said something I had not planned to say. The will is not the one you remember. The room became still. Julia sat down. Mark remained standing. What does that mean? He asked. It means I reviewed my estate plan. When? Recently. Why? Because it needed reviewing. With who? My attorney. What changed? I am not discussing the details today. Mark's face reddened. I'm the executor, I need to know. You may not be. He stared at me. Julia whispered, Mom. I stood slowly. I am tired, you should both go. Mark refused. You can't announce something like that and refuse to explain. I just did. This affects all of us. It affects me first. He accused William of manipulating me. Julia asked whether I was angry about Christmas. I told them Christmas had taught me something, but it was not the only reason. Mark demanded a copy. I said no. He said wills should not be secret from family. I reminded him that a will is private, while the person who made it is alive. He said secrecy created conflict. I answered entitlement created the conflict. They left separately. The next week was filled with calls. Mark apologized and asked to meet privately. Julia sent a long message explaining why transparency mattered. Karen called to say the children were worried about my judgment. Even Caleb asked whether something had happened. I told him only that my estate plan was my responsibility, and he should not allow adults to place him in the middle. Then I called William. I told them it changed, I said. He was silent for a moment. Do you feel unsafe? No. Do they have access to your home or documents? Mark has a key. Change the locks. That seemed dramatic. Then I remembered Christmas. The open drawers. The photographs. The list. I changed the locks. I moved remaining sensitive records to a safe deposit box. I updated account passwords. I told my bank that neither child had authority to act for me. I also requested copies of my credit report. Nothing unusual appeared. The precautions were not accusations. They were boundaries. Mark arrived 2 days later and discovered his key no longer worked. He called from the porch. Why did you change the lock? Because I wanted to. You think I'm going to steal something? I think keys should belong to people who have permission to enter. I'm your son. You are also an adult with your own house. He asked me to open the door. I did. But I did not give him a new key. We sat at the dining table. The same table Karen had already claimed. Mark spoke softly. He said he had been hurt. He said serving as executor had made him feel trusted by Samuel. He said removing him would be a public humiliation. There is nothing public about it, I said. Julia will know. That is not the public. She'll think you chose her. I did not choose her. He looked confused. Then who? A professional. He leaned back. You're paying a stranger to handle family property? I am paying a neutral professional to follow instructions. I would follow them. You already argue with decisions I make while I am alive. That's different. It is exactly why I changed it. He became angry. He said I was punishing him for caring. I asked why caring required future ownership of the house. He said it did not. Then, minutes later, He said he had made financial plans based on inheriting it. What plans? I asked. He hesitated. Karen and he wanted to sell their current home in a few years. They expected to move into mine. They had delayed certain retirement contributions because the house would eventually reduce their expenses. I stared at him. You built your retirement plan around my death. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you described. We were being practical. You were spending an inheritance you did not have. His voice rose. Dad wanted me to have the house. Your father wanted me to have it first. He stopped. I continued. Samuel and I built this home. He made sure I owned it fully after he died. He did not make you co-owner. That was temporary. No, that was marriage. Mark stood. You have always favored Julia emotionally. And you have always counted money. That's not fair. Neither is assuming my home is part of your retirement plan. He left without saying goodbye. Julia came the following day. She did not demand details immediately. She made tea. She asked how I was feeling. For a moment, I wondered whether she had understood. Then she placed a notebook on the table. I made a list of questions, she said. I almost laughed. She wanted to know whether Mark had been removed, whether the estate was still divided equally, whether the grandchildren were included, whether my charity gifts had changed, whether I had considered taxes. I closed the notebook. You are doing the same thing he did. No, I'm trying to prevent surprises. The surprise belongs to me while I am alive. That doesn't make sense. It means I am not required to distribute a preview of my death. She looked hurt. I thought we were close. We can be close without discussing my account balances. What if Mark pressures you? He did. What if he gets more? Is that your concern? She looked away. There it was. Not only fairness. Comparison. The old childhood scoreboard.